All right, it is 7:02, and we're calling this meeting to order. First up on the agenda is a roll call. So starting left to right, Commissioner Gill.
Present.
Commissioner Cryer.
Present.
Commissioner Edwards.
Present.
And Commissioner Lates, myself, is present. And Commissioner Sanders Pierce.
Present.
And absent currently are Commissioners Redmond and Bryan. Next up, the approval of the agenda. Do we have any additions or modifications to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, there's no staff changes.
No modifications proposed, but I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Commissioner Gill,
And I will second that motion.
seconded by Edwards. All those in favor?
Aye.
Next up, we have the approval of minutes from March 17, 2025. Do we have any comments or changes? I will move to approve those minutes,
I'll second.
seconded by Commissioner Gill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. On to the next item on the agenda is the new business, St. Paul Police Training Facility at 2621 Linwood Avenue East, wetland buffer variance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. So tonight we will be reviewing the St. Paul Police Training Facility. This is coming before us after the Planning Commission and Design Review Board reviewed that last week. So I'll give you an update on the project, and then we'll discuss the wetland buffer variance request that we'll be reviewing tonight. So the St. Paul Training Facility is located at 2621 Linwood Avenue, and this is a 37-acre site and south parcel in the former golf course, and you can see that on the bottom left-hand corner of the golf course lot, which of course the golf course has been closed, but the training facility has been there since the mid-1960s. Ramsey County does own the property, and St. Paul has leased that property since that time frame. So to move forward with the proposal, the applicant does request a conditional use permit, design plans, and a wetland buffer variance. This property is zoned farm residential. It's kind of some leftover zoning from days gone by. Future land use does call it out as park. However, the city code does allow for a conditional use permit for public land uses in any zoning districts. But when the St. Paul Police Department began leasing the site from Ramsey County, the CUP was not required. But now with this expansion, they will be required to get that conditional use permit. So the use of the property is not changing. The proposal is to rebuild the classroom facility, which did prompt this conditional use permit requirement because it is an expansion, and that is required to comply with the current city regulations. And as I stated, the use is currently established. So regarding the wetlands, you can see there's quite a few wetlands located on the old ponds of, I should say, Century Ponds Golf Course there. And the two wetlands that were affecting the development of this property are the red wetlands located on that lower left-hand corner on that site, and then on the adjacent site to the west. And those are shown as red wetlands, which means that they are Manage A wetlands, which according to our classification system, a Manage A wetland is a more pristine wetland, hasn't been as impacted over the years as the other wetlands, Manage B or Manage C, which is I guess has been the most degraded and impacted. So this is a high quality wetland. They have had a delineation complete, and that was included in your staff report, and they did, the Watershed District has approved of that delineation, and they do call it out as a Manage A wetland. So the city code requires that a Manage A wetland have a 75-foot minimum and 100-foot average wetland buffer. And the minimum and average was put in place years ago in the ordinance to allow for some flexibility when developing near wetlands. So let's say you had a parking lot that, I don't know, the corner just kind of encroached slightly into the buffer, within that 75 foot. So that would be allowed if the applicant were to expand the wetland buffer in other areas. And so that would be considered wetland buffer averaging. And that is allowed without special approvals, just take staff approval and, that mitigation plan that's approved prior to the grading permit. But when you encroach closer than 75 feet, you're looking at a variance. Or I should say closer than that 100 foot, you're looking at a variance. And that's what we'll be looking at here. There are several areas of the wetland buffer that we would kind of consider averaging, but overall it is a wetland buffer variance because they are encroaching closer than that 75 foot. And within that buffer, the wetland ordinance does restrict any building, mowing, or grading within that wetland buffer. Now, we know a lot of wetland buffers are already impacted, might have some impacts, degradation already, but any new expansion will require this, no building, mowing, or grading.
Can I ask that? So
Yes,
because it
please
is
ask
a
questions.
Because it's a manage A, it means that that mowing and grading is minimal at the present, is that right?
That is not correct.
Okay, I thought that was what the difference between manage A and manage B were.
Well, this, as you can see from this map here, it does show that the existing conditions, there is Class 5 parking lot that has been installed years ago, almost right up to the wetland buffer. But regardless of that and that impact, the wetland is still, has been classified as a Manage A, as one of the higher classes of wetlands. There could be some the wetland delineation report and the watershed district may not have identified exactly that it's a Manage A. It's a little gray area, but our wetland ordinance maps do identify it as a Manage A, and the St. Paul Police Training Facility and the applicants are moving forward as a Manage A. To really determine the classification, you would have to do a MinRam study, which is what the Watershed District did years ago. They take a look at the soils, the water, the plant material, and all that. And that, again, hasn't been double checked here, but the delineation as far as showing where that wetland edge is correct. And it was originally a Manage A when the city of Maplewood adopted the wetland classifications, which was back in 2006. And this was based on Ramsey, Washington Metro Watershed District doing a MinRam study on all their wetlands throughout the city. So it's based on that 2006 data that it's a Manage A. But you can see clearly here that there is current impacts to that wetland. I guess I was just referring to historically a Manage A would be a wetland that doesn't have a lot of development around it. And you can see here that there is a lot of green open space around the remaining portions of the wetland. So the existing conditions on this facility do have a drive lane, tactical training building, a storage building, and a gravel pad that extend currently into that 100-foot wetland buffer. And these are considered pre-existing non-conforming and, could remain without a variance. However, when you propose some sort of expansion, now you have to comply with the city's wetland ordinance and buffer requirements, which is what we will be looking at here. So the proposal replaces the classroom training facility and includes accessibility and safety upgrades. It'll be a 3,196 square foot building. It'll be located on the southwest section of the site adjacent to the existing building, which will be demolished. There'll be access from the south off of Linwood Avenue, and it will include a classroom, 2 armories, a men's and women's locker room, a a kitchenette and break room, and it will be ADA compliant restrooms there. So, you know, they needed these improvements in order to do the classroom, things like that, and make it more accessible and comfortable as a classroom too. So the existing facility does utilize well and septic infrastructure because there is currently no water or sewer connection in that area. This will be replaced as part of the project due to the age of the existing system, so they're actually required to upgrade that with new well and septic.
Is there no city services on Linwood Avenue? Because I think the other side of Linwood Avenue, they have city services. So it's just surprising to me that there's not, they can't connect via Linwood Avenue. And I wasn't part of the planning commission, so I don't know, you know, I'm sure this was all discussed there.
And you'll have an opportunity to come up and speak, but to my knowledge, it's not possible to connect wherever that sewer and water is. Currently, whatever type of barriers, and we do know of a proposed development which may go into the Century Ponds Golf Course, which of course would require extension of sewer and water in that area, which opens up opportunity to extend the sewer and water at this site. However, the St. Paul Police Training Facility, they would like to move forward with the project, and you know, the extension of that sewer doesn't meet their time frame. So the building and parking are entirely screened with existing landscaping. They are set back 201 feet from the property line to the south along Linwood Avenue and 84 feet to the property line to the west. And so they are entirely screened from the adjacent public streets and residential properties. And all of those setbacks do meet the zoning requirements, you know, to residential properties and so forth. So the St. Paul Training Facility had to submit a tree plan which showed the significant trees that are located on the site. And a significant tree is a hardwood that is 8 inches or larger, conifer that, no, excuse me, hardwood is a hardwood tree, excuse me, start over. Significant tree is a hardwood tree that is 6 inches or larger, a conifer tree that's 8 inches or larger, or a softwood that's 12 inches or larger. So on the survey, they identified all those trees, and there's quite a few mature trees on that site, as you can see from those dots with the kind of rounded edge. Those are trees. And they are proposing to remove 18 of those trees with the development. And our tree ordinance does require that they remove or replace one 2-caliber-inch tree for one significant tree removed if, and only if, they are removing less than 20% of the overall number of significant trees on the site, and that's what's happening here. So that ordinance reflects that there's so many trees remaining on the site that you know, we don't use that tree replacement calculation. That doesn't kick in until you're removing more than that 20%. So they do meet the tree ordinance in that regard. And then all other tree coverage on the site will remain to provide visual and acoustic screening of the building and exterior training areas. So here's what we are here to discuss tonight, and this is the wetland buffer. So on this map, you can see the areas identified. There's 2 dashed lines around each of the wetlands. The one closest to the wetland is the 75-foot minimum buffer, and the one furthest away from the wetland is the 100-foot required buffer, the average buffer. And then the colored areas of the development, this is a grading plan that shows where they'll impact with grading work, shows those encroachments into that 75-foot buffer. And on the east wetland, you'll see that there's grading to within approximately 53 feet of the eastern wetland for the extension of a utility line, parking stall, and that septic system. And they really worked hard to try to get that septic system out of the buffer, but because of the requirements of the septic system being placed in undisturbed soil and you know, drainage issues and the grade of the lot, this this was the location that they had to place it. On the west wetland, you'll see grading to within approximately 59 feet of the western wetland, and that'll be for building earthwork. So you can see they're just kind of grading the site to be, to have a less of a slope up to the building, and that will encroach slightly into that buffer. So based on the wetland buffer encroachments, this project does require a 41-foot wetland buffer variance. And so according to our wetland ordinance, the Planning Commission and Environmental Commission review the wetland buffer variances and make recommendation to the City Council. And in particular, with the Environmental Commission, you review the mitigation strategies that are being proposed by the applicant and see if they meet the impacts, equal the impacts that are being created on that site, and offer your guidance on that mitigation plan. So the wetland buffer mitigation plan is a requirement, as I stated, for these wetland buffer variances. And there's 7 areas that the Environmental Commission can look at and consider requiring in a wetland buffer variance. First, the mitigation plan should reduce impacts, rectify the impact by repairing the buffer, and these are just different things that they can apply in the mitigation plan. Reduce impacts by maintenance, compensate for the impact by providing additional buffer, monitor the impact, native plant restoration, and wetland buffer mitigation surety would be required to ensure that whatever mitigation is approved, the city holds that surety for 3 years, because we do know that the establishing the native plants and now with buckthorn removal and things like that, it does take some time to ensure that, again, that's established and that those non-natives will not come back. So we hold that surety for 3 years. We require that they sign a maintenance agreement. It's best if they work with a company to come out, for that 3-year period and do the weeding and everything that's required to maintain and establish those. So that's one way that we have found success in requiring these mitigation plans. And one thing we've been looking at now for many years, I'd say the last 5 years, as far as mitigation plans and any kind of variance or averaging, is allowing applicants to take a look at what's currently located in the buffer. And of course, unfortunately, in Maplewood, we have so much buckthorn, which of course is a non-native woody plant material that kind of takes over other plants, and requiring as a mitigation strategy removal of that buckthorn in the wetland buffer, and of course treating those stubs appropriately and maintaining so it doesn't come back after that 3-year period. So what the St. Paul Police Training Facility is proposing as mitigation is 17,700 square feet of buckthorn removal, and then in its place putting down native seed, because of course it will leave some bare soil there and it'll be more, bring in more sunlight, so it'll have an opportunity to establish some natives in that area. And those areas are shown in green. And I'm assuming those areas were chosen mainly because of the buckthorn that's existing in there, and then maybe the grades of those areas. So we looked at this as an environmental staff review, which is attached to your staff report, and it kind of goes into detail on recommendations that the city would require prior to issuing a grading permit. And these are areas that we are recommending, that we would like to see a detailed plan for buckthorn removal and native seeding, plan to show the seed mix, species, and seeding installation methods, having those real detailed plans that our natural resources coordinator can look at and make comment on. And then identify the location of wetland buffer signs to be installed every 100 feet at a minimum along the approved wetland buffers. Now, they are encroaching in some areas of the buffer, but whatever is established as that buffer edge. The city of Maplewood manufacture these signs, and they're throughout Maplewood. We do charge the developer, I think it's $35 a sign, and then they identify where they'll be located on the survey, and then they'll install those. And that way, 10 years from now, when a maintenance person is out there mowing the grass, they're not mowing into the buffer. So it's one way to identify that buffer. And then those signs do identify that no building, mowing, or grading should take place within the buffer. And then I mentioned the wetland buffer mitigation and maintenance agreement with the city, and that would require the mitigation within the buffer for a 3-year period, and then that cash escrow that I had mentioned. And then one area of that I wanted to point out is that current Class 5 parking area does, appear to likely cause some runoff into that wetland directly. And the police training facility representatives that are here tonight can speak to this further. But, there might be some opportunity to establish a 10-foot wide or wider area of native plants on the east side of that existing Class 5 parking area adjacent to wetland. And in staff's analysis, adding native plants in this area will help filter runoff from the Class 5 parking area to that wetland. So another suggestion for your review. I do believe that they do not want to remove this Class 5 parking facility for certain reasons, and which they can go into detail. So with that, I wanted to mention the schedule here. So on April 15th of last week, the project went to our Community Design Review Board, and they look at the building design, the lighting, landscaping, basic architecture details, and they did approve those design plans on April 15th. And then later that evening, the Planning Commission is required to hold a public hearing because it is a conditional use permit, and approve. So they had several neighbors attend the meeting and had comments. But ultimately, the Planning Commission did approve the conditional use permit for the expansion of that use, and then also they approved the wetland buffer variance, which again is within their preview to make a recommendation. So tonight, the Environmental and Natural Resources Commission will review the wetland buffer variance request as well as the mitigation strategies. And currently, it is proposed to go to the City Council on May 12th to review all 3 of those land use permits. So with that, staff is happy to answer questions of the commission. I do note that we have the applicants in the audience, which I'm sure they would like to present some items for the commission. And then, now this is not a public hearing, but of course, we always welcome visitors. I do notice some visitors in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Do you have any comments for staff initially from the commission?
I think maybe if the applicants would like to come up to the podium, speak, or if there's any questions from the audience, I think we welcome that now. Then maybe ask some questions.
Yes, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Deb Brandwick with Ortel Architects, project manager for the design team. I'll just start out with a couple of things. One, just to clarify, the SPPD is not looking to expand their operations on the site. They're simply replacing a building that is no longer, hasn't been functional, is not ADA accessible, is not safe in the fact that they have the armory in the same space as they have their lunch facilities and their meeting area. And so it's not a safe location to have staff working. As far as the septic system, the current septic system has ceased working. So regardless of a new building or not a new building, they need a new septic system. And because you can't put the septic system where the old one was, we need a new location. And as Sean went through for you, the spaces, due to the grading of the site, the spaces are limited where it can go. So we've had to find the kind of a somewhat flat area that has not been disturbed previously, and so that we tried to keep it out of the wetland setback to the best we could, but it is where it is. Questions as to hooking up to city services. Currently, and these are estimates from Google Maps because I do not have a full city survey, the sanitary appears to stop about 1,200 feet from the east of our site, and the water stops about 630 feet to the west of the site. I know the SPBD project did get put on hold last fall when the housing development started to gain traction. And there were discussions between the county who owns the property and the city of St. Paul and the city of Maplewood trying to work things out, but that project just is not moving forward at the pace that the St. Paul Police needs their site operational. And it's not guaranteed to go forward, much less what the time frame would be. And then just a side note on the tree removal, the caliper inches being removed is proposed to be about 5.1% of the total caliper inches of trees. So kind of replacing a 1-for-1 tree situation is the proposal.
So if I may ask a question, I have a couple of questions, but generally on the whole, is this improvement going to be increasing the imperviousness on the site or maintaining the existing impervious or reducing it?
Maintaining, it's currently there's asphalt in class 5. Our asphalt is going to extend a little bit into the existing class 5 to keep a continuous from that existing drive lane in. Right now you kind of have to cut onto the class 5 to get back onto the asphalt, so kind of making that all with the grading project, kind of regrading to work with the building, and then putting in new pavement.
Yeah, thank you. And that is a follow-up question, is that class 5 that's on the east side of the area adjacent to wetland 1, do you have a sense for how intensively that class 5 is used in terms of the parking? You know, and I did see in the wetland delineation report, there was a couple of pictures around the wetland, and there's a view from the west, and you can see, you know, vehicles parked right on the edge of the wetland boundary there. Do you have a sense on how intensively that area is used?
I would say it's not intensive. I mean, the main parking happens on the asphalt on the west side. There may be overflow or somebody who's, you know, just kind of pulls up that day and parks there if they're not directed otherwise. That side where the class 5 is part of one of the firing ranges. You can see there's a firing range shelter on the south side of that class 5. So they're longer range guns, they will shoot over that area. And then they use that area also to drive through to get back to that tactical training area on the northeast side, kind of north of the pond.
Okay, thank you. So if I may ask another question, then just in the winter, does that class 5 area get plowed? Do you know?
This I do not know. Occasionally is the answer from the police department.
So one of the reasons
I can say I was out there last spring, and because of the low grade to that pond does overflow into that class 5 quite a distance. This spring, not as bad because everything's been really dry.
Okay, thank you.
Helps or hurts, but. Other questions?
Was there any discussion about the buffer that we're taking away to put that, to try and expand a wetland in another part to make up for that. It's 25% about, I think, that we're going into the bigger wetland A or whatever. It's the bigger one. If we're going to take some away from there, do we expand into a different, or do we make a different wetland? Do we try to reclaim something in a different part of the area? Am I saying this right at all? Does anyone understand what I'm saying? Was there any discussion about that at all?
If I followed you, I know there was the one recommendation from staff to add 10 feet of buffer
Right.
between the, kind of take some of that class 5, and I believe the SPPD is amenable to that. To the north side of the wetland, it goes right into their there's a
Right.
small buffer, it goes right into their tactical area. And then as you come around the east and the south, that is all buffer right now.
Okay. Is it mowed there, or is that?
It is not.
It
No,
is
it's
not,
all,
okay.
it's all natural,
It's all
wooded,
natural,
treed.
okay.
Yeah.
So I have a question. This is for staff. So with respect to the Class 5 area, this is an area that I'm, pretty interested in, and I really do look quite favorably on the staff suggestion to have a buffer that's along that wetland edge there, or at least some kind of native strip. But I was trying to understand how the implementation of the monuments or the signage would happen along that buffer for wetland 1, because in my mind, I'm thinking, is the operation going to have, signage like in the middle of their class 5 or in their, asphalt? I'm not really clear, typically these buffer monuments are in areas that are not really highly utilized, and I'm getting the sense that, a lot of that class 5 area and that part of the site where the buffer runs through for wetland 1, or the 75-foot line, I should say, the 75-foot minimum buffer line kind of runs through areas that are utilized, right? Either for overflow parking or other activities. So can you help me understand, like, maybe how that would get contemplated, the placement of the signage for the 75-foot minimum buffer, or whatever the buffer ends up?
So we would likely require that the buffer signs be placed on the west side of the newly established buffer, and it would probably be adjacent directly to that class 5. And, maybe there's another creative way to kind of create a barrier so people aren't pulling up over the plants and things like that. Maybe split rail fence, something like that along the side of the buffer. But we do see that, where it's, the buffer signs are placed right at the edge of landscaping, and then, of course, the buffer is beyond. And that's really why those signs are in place, because now the person doing that landscaping knows they have to stop mowing right there, or now with that class 5, they'll know you can't park further than the sign, or perhaps a split rail fence or whatever it is. But yes, it would be, that's how I envision it, would be right at that buffer line, this newly established buffer line, which would be 10 or whatever is established here.
Okay, yeah, thank you, that's helpful. And that's a good clarification, because I was wondering about what activities would be allowed. I mean, certainly no mowing, no grading and so forth, but parking of vehicles within that buffer would be restricted. And I'm speaking about the overflow area that's adjacent to wetland 1. Is that correct?
Well, just within the established buffer, the 10-foot,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
so they could park right up 10 feet. I mean, if that's approved.
Yeah, I understand now. Okay, that's helpful. So, I would, and this is maybe for Chair Lates and commissioners, I was thinking about this native strip along the wetland, and I don't want to refer to it as a buffer because we kind of get the terminology confused a little bit. So this native planting strip, the 75, the minimum buffer is 75 feet. Right now, staff has suggested 10 feet for a planting strip, which I think is very reasonable, but I think there's a lot of drainage, surface drainage that comes from the new building and the asphalt and the Class 5, and it all goes towards that wetland. And I think a slightly wider buffer might be a little bit more conducive to achieving the reduction in runoff and really creating something functional. So 75 feet, 15 feet would be 20% of that minimum buffer. So rather than 10 feet, 15 feet might be a little bit more functional, and it's 20% of that 75-foot minimum. But in particular, the other piece of it, one of the reasons why I think it's really a valuable thing to consider is because what's currently been proposed, I think the 17,700 feet is really a strong mitigation proposal to remove that buckthorn and replace it. But the removal of buckthorn that's happening along the septic area and the slope is, maybe somewhat a little opportunistic because all of that's going to get graded anyway. So all that buckthorn is going to come out anyway. So all you're really doing is just putting the native plantings back. And I don't want to say all you're doing. I mean, I don't mean to diminish that. But at the same time, I think that really investing in a quality riparian edge and a 15-foot native planting would minimize, again, the effects of the sheet flow runoff that's going to come from the new building, the asphalt, and the Class 5, as well as really start to create more continuity along the perimeter of the wetland where there really hasn't been any connection of habitat. So, those are things that I'm contemplating and trying to get a sense on how that would impact, going from maybe, 0 to 10 or 0 to 15 in terms of a width of a potential native planting area. Trying to get a sense on how that would affect the current operations there and the placement of the signage. Those are all things that I'm really hoping we can get some clarity on, and I do appreciate staff the idea of maybe something a little bit different than just the signposts to prevent any unintentional usage of that area, particularly of the native planting area, because that's a really vulnerable area right along the riparian edge there. Comments or reactions to that?
I just have a couple of questions, and staff hopefully can help me out with these. But those signs, thinking on snow storage, do they touch on that as well? Just making sure that when it is plowed, it's not being plowed into that buffer, into the wetland edge. And if not, can we add a few more characters to that signage to
That is a
make
good
that
point.
clear?
Yeah, there's really nothing in our code that speaks to snow storage in the buffer, but something that we could include in the conditional use permit conditions of approval.
Okay.
And I guess we can modify a sign to say, and by the way, don't push your snow up against this particular one. But that's all possible, yes.
Okay. Then I also had some clarifying questions. I saw in the staff report some potential mitigation. One of the, I think, option number 4 is having a 2-to-1 encroachment replacement. Wondering, in these older lots where they're approved prior to current regulations, in the past, have we tried to retrofit not just what's being proposed with the current proposal, but looking at other areas that are within the buffer that are there because they're established prior to the current regulations?
I was writing down your past comments, and
yeah.
I kind of lost track there.
Yeah, sorry.
Pardon me.
So my understanding is the mitigation that we're seeing on this proposal today is because of the new encroachment into the buffer. wondering if we can look at include the other areas that are already within the buffer because they were placed there prior to current requirements. If we can include that in the 2-to-1 replacement of this new restored buffer.
Right, okay, I understand. So I must admit that I didn't verify, and I don't think they were in the plans, correct me if I'm wrong, that the amount of encroachment meets the square footage proposed for the mitigation. So, number one, we should make sure we're looking at that. Number two, that's certainly something you can recommend. But again, it's a pre-existing non-conforming. So we can't really put requirements on the non-conformity. However, I think in this case, number one, we should just ask, is the square footage being proposed the exact amount that they're impacting? And Mr. Chair, if we could get clarification on that, that would help my answer.
And applicants here to speak to that.
I don't believe the calculation was on the plans, but that was certainly the intent, but numbers and calculations to be submitted, apparently, because I don't recall.
Do you think it meets the impact, the square footage of the impact?
That was our intent when we showed the amount. It wasn't a completely random amount shown, and then we, yes, we started on the one side where we're already impacting and going to be regrading, as opposed to digging into areas that are kind of more native soil. And then on the west side, there was a just very large amount of the, oh God, I keep forgetting, buckthorn to be removed. So we showed a large swath through there.
Well, with that said, the ordinance does state that one of the mitigation strategies could be requiring 2-for-1 buffer establishment, so, or mitigation. So right now, it sounds like they're proposing 1-for-1. So expanding on that mitigation, which we might be proposing tonight with the 10 or 15-foot strip of new buffer, there's maybe some room for the 2-to-1.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea, just because thinking about buckthorn and how aggressive it is, I know we have the 3-year surety, but if we try to expand that buffer as much as possible, because after the 3 years, most likely it's going to move back in. So looking at the plans, it looks like it's just kind of piecemeally. If we could maybe have like a more uniform, thank you, staff.
Oops, sorry. I'll actually move back further, right here.
Yeah, that's a better look at it. Just having maybe a more uniform, especially along Wetland 1, buffer established there would make it more resilient for time to come. Not to mention the long-term maintenance for the police department after that 3 years. Hopefully it's a little more resilient to that as well. So my thoughts.
Could I comment or ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
If that 10-foot proposed buffer goes to 15 feet, it does start to encroach on their firing line. Would it be acceptable to keep that to lower plantings and/or remove any opportunistic trees that started to grow in that area?
I think that in context of the buffer, and I think one of the things with respect to the current recommendations, I think one of them is to have a detailed landscaping plan. So, the heights of the plants is still to be determined. I think, the piece about the opportunistic trees, wasn't quite sure I understood that. So if you could maybe rephrase that for me.
Just because if we go to 15 feet, it was going to be 1 or 2 feet into their lane. Now we're like 6 or 7 feet into their lane. And I'd like to speak to this, but if all of a sudden a tree starts growing up right on that edge and then somebody's firing and maybe it ricochets off the tree, or I don't know.
Yes, that's
It
my
seems like it could be,
Right, I understand what you're
Problematic.
saying, yeah. So I believe something like that would be covered in the detailed landscaping plan and the maintenance for that buffer,
yeah,
which
the
would
maintenance for
say,
any future,
you know, like any
Growth.
volunteer, like a cottonwood or something like
Yeah.
that, which would be undesirable for the function of the site. You know, would probably, you know, cottonwood saplings are pretty aggressive, could be addressed. You know, and I think one of the things with respect to, as we look at this area, you know, so the 10-foot or 15-foot, you know, width along the edge, one of the most important things is that the site, you know, whatever that width is, that it gets properly prepared for the plantings. You know, there's a lot of compaction that's happened, so that's a primary thing. But I was not really clear, I'm looking at the black and white here, and, you know, your comment about the trees maybe called my attention to the indication of trees along the north side of the wetland one there. And, you know, I don't know if there's buckthorn that is in the understory of those trees there.
there's a little bit.
You know, and so instead of a, you know, instead of 15 feet, right, 10 feet that maybe goes farther around the edge, in the sense that, you know, not necessarily, you know, removing any existing trees, but continuing that buckthorn abatement and, you know, reintroducing or encouraging the reintroduction of more appropriate wetland edge species, you know, around the perimeter is really, I think, a priority for this. So, you know, I mean, certainly a wider strip would have the benefits of trying to address some of the sheet flow and runoff that would come from the site. But I think from an ecological standpoint, getting that buckthorn abated and a more contiguous habitat improvement around the edge would, I think, really have more value from an ecosystem standpoint.
I agree, yeah, and just to clarify my comments earlier, I definitely agree with either the 10 or the 15 buffer along the Class 5, but I was thinking, once we get outside of that Class 5, widening that buffer along the south end and/or the north end, if possible.
And you're referring to the buckthorn removal mitigation around?
Whether there is or is not buckthorn there, I think just the most likely, even if there isn't buckthorn there, the species present are most likely probably.
So focusing on all the non-impacted, currently non-impacted wetland buffers located on the property and requiring the mitigation with buckthorn removal or other invasives in those buffers. So in this picture, this site plan, it would then move the buckthorn removal, you know, further south on Wetland 1.
Correct, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And then I did want to point out, it's a little unclear, I think, for our group to determine where the firing range is and how, you know, the angles of everything. So when you refer to the buffer being in the range, we're not quite sure what you're referring to, at least I'm not. And since we're proposing some changes, I just did want to mention, and we do have members of the police department that could speak to a few of these things, but this is scheduled to go to the city council on May 12th, but I don't want to delay things. But, you know, we are here tonight to discuss the mitigation plan. And if you don't have the plans that you need before you, you know, it's perfectly acceptable to table and review this on May 19th, in which case we could have a quick turnaround to the May 26th city council meeting. But I just wanted to put that out there as a possibility. I know the police department is trying to move this forward quickly, but it would just delay it by 2 weeks. But if it helps get you what you need, please know that that is a possibility. Thank you.
I would be interested in that, what she was talking about with the fire, like where are you doing your practice rounds in here, on this map?
I do have a handout if you would
Oh,
be
sure.
interested in that.
Sure.
Small scale, so it's a little bit to see. Say the green dash line was the 10-foot proposed, and the red line is the edge of their firing range. So they're firing from here to, I mean, it comes over here. but that's the-
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. You're gonna pass, we'll take one more.
So maybe where 19 is where they're,
Right.
yeah, I think that's, yeah. Existing rain shelter, yep, okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
There's a possibility I could put it up on the, there's a possibility I could put it on the screen here, if you have a, I think that was how we did it old school back in the day.
I didn't see it, so, whoops. So I didn't know you had a projector.
Let's see if that's possible. We're going to test our videographer here. Is it possible to get the overhead, the old overhead? Speaking to our video person, there we go.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Let's see. Remember, it's like looking in a mirror? Where are we here? Oh,
There you go. Thank you, Sean.
okay.
So now I actually have more questions. Were we discussing that vehicles sometimes park in this area?
Gosh, it's hard.
Yeah, that's what I understood as overflow parking, and I also.
When they're not fired.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh.
All right.
Right.
Stop. There. Stop.
There.
Okay, up is down.
Perfect.
No more moving.
Thank you.
If I send you another photo, can you get that, if I email it to you? Yes, I will.
So, good evening. I'm Lisa Cruz. I'm a sergeant with the St. Paul Police Department, and I work in the range. So what you're looking at now, there's a edge of the firing range line back to that small rectangle building at the far south. That is a long-range rifle range. So from that small rectangle and in, we would be shooting to the north. So in coming over 15 feet is going to be coming into that firing line, which is even with that gray rectangle, which is our firing bay. And to address the question on the parking, that class 5 is overflow parking only. And because we are shooting long-range rifle on that range, it is not desirable to park on there because you're going to get some damage to your car inadvertently. So typically, parking is on the blacktop area.
Okay. That's helpful, thank you.
If I could ask just a follow-up question. So we had, just a few moments ago, contemplated the potential to carry that, that buffer around the north part of the wetland, where those trees are. I was wondering if there would be any, yeah, thank you for that. Would there be any adverse impacts to the operations in that area?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And same to the, I guess it would be to the east of wetland number 1. Would not impact operations at all.
Right, around there, yeah. So if you're firing over that area and it is just native grasses, or if it's nothing tall, why wouldn't we take out more of the class 5?
Because we're going to be walking over it. So we
Okay.
shoot from that little gray rectangle in. So people
Right.
are moving forwards and backwards and walking on that space.
Okay, and that's the reason for the class 5 also?
Correct, because it
Okay.
gets very muddy.
Okay. And yes, I like the idea of going around to the east side too, to make sure to get all the buckthorn and the non-natives out of there. I think that's a good idea.
That would be preferred over the 15-foot or more going over into that shooting lane.
For you all, yep, for
Yes,
sure, yep.
yes.
I agree.
So Commissioner Gill, if I could, so your question previously was about the calculations of the buffer square footage. And what I heard was we don't have clarity on exactly what the compensatory situation is, whether it's 2-to-1 or 1-to-1. Is that correct?
Correct. That was kind of one of my points, just some seeking clarity on what's the current encroachment square footage would be and what the proposed restoration square footage is, to see if it is that 2-to-1. And then I think the second part of that was more so for staff. If we could kind of use that 2-to-1 rule of thumb to look at other areas that are within the buffer, because no, we're not, with legal nonconformities, not trying to alter the use, but also purposes with legal nonconformities, trying to bring them into close to conformity as possible. So just propose that as well.
So then, as we think about this, would it be helpful to have, updated calculations that consider a buffer in addition to what has been proposed, having the numbers be updated to reflect staff's recommendation of a 10-foot width of native plantings along the wetland edge that goes, up on the west edge and then up to the north, so we can, get some revised square foot calculations?
I think that would be helpful to provide some clarity. I don't know what that does to project timelines necessarily.
Well, I think staff's recommendation was to potentially consider tabling it to give the applicant time to come back with more information for us so we can better understand the quantification aspect, which seems reasonable. Yeah.
Excuse me, may I speak?
Yes, please.
Okay. I live in the neighborhood of the gun range at 566 Deer Ridge, and we hear it quite often. It's a problem for us. It diminishes our real estate, because when they finally find out that there's a gun range that they're going to hear all the time, the value of the houses goes down, okay? But my greater concern is for the children. And since this is a conditional use permit, I was wondering, the one thing that you have not considered, I understand all of this stuff about the wetlands and the buffers. That is very important, okay? But you're forgetting about one environmental factor that's very crucial: noise, okay? What I would like to recommend as a condition for the St. Paul Police to use this area, if they want to update it, that they are only allowed to shoot during 9 o'clock to 2:30 in the afternoon, when kids are no longer present. They're in school. And no firing during the summer, okay? I put it out there as a suggestion to you. You can veto it, but it's a very, very important aspect to our neighborhood. And in the association that I live in, there aren't a lot of children, but if you look at the development all around the gun range, there are single-family homes which have children which go to school. And I guess I'm just asking, will you please consider noise as an environmental factor? Because I think this is a very, very important thing for you to do. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, could we get the neighbor's name just for the record?
Yes, please. Could you please
What?
introduce yourself For the
Oh,
record.
I'm sorry. I'm Marlis Howells. I live at 566 Deer Ridge Lane.
Thank you.
Okay?
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate your comments there.
Yeah, I would just like to speak to that real briefly. I appreciate the concerns. I do want to acknowledge that I am very, very close by. I'm within the 500-foot notification for the variance, so I got a mailing at my property. So I understand that you have come here to provide your recommendation to us. In my perspective, we really need to be focused on the wetland classification. It's a wetland A, and the variance is for a buffer encroachment. And so we need to make sure that any of our recommendations to city council for the mitigation plan or the variance on the buffer, there has to be a nexus to that. So that's why we've been spending so much time talking about, the vegetation as it directly relates to the quality of the wetland. So I don't think we have the opportunity to bring into our consideration the realm of noise. So we've been, in my mind, I think appropriately talking about the mitigation in terms of the vegetation around the wetland. But I do understand your perspective because I also live in the neighborhood. So I'm aware of everything that goes along with living in that part of the town.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, thank you again for coming up to address or speak your concerns. But I think another opportunity, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, would be at the council meeting, just because what the commission's purview is, that's probably a little bit outside of that, so.
I understand that.
Mhm.
So I think what we've discussed so far is relating to the wetlands variance. In summary, we have questions about the square footage with the 2-to-1 versus 1-to-1, and maybe looking to get some more clarification on that through some more details in the plan. Kind of all in the thinking that we may want to see about getting those additional details and look at it in the.
Yeah, so I would like to make a motion that we table the decision for the variance application that we're entertaining. And I would like to make the motion that we table it with the purpose of receiving more information on the quantification of the buffer, with the understanding that the updated information will include a additional buffer that's 10 feet, as shown in the site plan here, that's 10 feet from the wetland edge, or along the wetland edge, along the west and northern part of the site. Specifically, I'll leave it at that. That's my motion.
This motion was made by Commissioner Sanders Pierce.
I'll also second the motion to table the decision to gather more information on the wetland buffer and area.
Mr. Chair, for clarification, would you like some sort of detail on demarcation of that buffer from the Class 5? Whatever that might be.
In terms of the.
Possibility of a decorative fence, or are the signs okay? Maybe we'd like to see where the signs are located.
Yes, some more details on the placement of the signage.
I would
think-
also say something about a fence. I would agree with that because like the snow, we don't want the plowing of the snow to get into that area too, and a sign's easy to see when it's buried in snow, so.
I think the motioner and seconder have to
Okay.
approve that But that was I just wanted for clarification.
So thank you. I'd like to revise my motion. I would like to motion that we table the decision for the variance application for the buffer so that we can obtain quantification from the applicant on the buffer calculations. With the buffer, in addition to what was presented in the application, with the buffer to include a 10-foot width along the west and north edge of Wetland 1, and additional information on the signage location along that buffer on the western edge and northern edge, as well as the type of signage to either entertain marking for no snow plowing or a more continuous physical barrier such as a split rail fence or decorative fence.
I will second that motion.
Seconded by Commissioner Gill. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the tabling of the item has been approved, and I did want to point out that I'm not in charge of the scheduling, but I just mentioned that the next meeting is May 26th. But if you have your meeting May 19th, there is a possibility it could go to May 26th, but I'm not in charge of the scheduling, but I don't see why we couldn't. So it shouldn't delay it too long, and I think these details are important to make sure we're getting the project right and mitigating these wetland buffer impacts. So thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to next points on the agenda. I do not see anything for unfinished business. Do we have any presentations from visitors in the room? Hearing none. Any commissioner presentations? We'll move on to staff presentations and oral reports. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a few updates for you, and I have some overheads we could take a look at. Well, actually, the first one doesn't have an overhead, but nonetheless. We were discussing the rescheduling of the Environmental Commission meetings to the second Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m., and I had sent you that detail about the City Council holding a workshop to begin a review of our commissions within the city to ensure a couple different things, ensuring that we have ability to have good public participation in the commission meetings, and some other things that they detailed. And we may see one of the managers here at one point to discuss what the City Council had reviewed, but in the end, it didn't affect the rescheduling. So we can go ahead and do that. And I just need to now work with communications and ensure that we have, the video personnel here. So I'm thinking the possibility of rescheduling now, or beginning our new schedule in June. But in the next slide, I'll show you that I had a tour scheduled for June 16th, so scratch that. It would actually be July that we'd begin. So that's the update there. And then the second item is the spring cleanup. I wanted to remind everyone about the annual spring cleanup, which is scheduled for May 3rd. It's 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Aldrich Arena. And I have here something that was published in the Maplewood Living, and it talks about all the items that will be accepted. We like to work with different vendors to take as much as we can and recycle those products. The police department will be there to take unwanted expired medicine. We work with US Again for reused clothing and shoes. Recovery Bike Shop takes in bicycles of any shape, and they refurbish those or use the parts. Mattresses and box springs will be taken in by Second Chance Recycling, and they recycle about 95% of the components of all of those mattresses and box springs. There's still small engine gas-powered equipment out there, and Peter's Small Engine Repair takes those items in and repairs them, and is able to resell those so they don't just all end up in the landfill. And then appliances and electronics, we work with retrofit companies who recycles all those components as required by the county. And then the areas which will likely, besides bulky metals, which will be recycled, the areas which usually go to Energy Center for converting into energy, carpet and carpet pad, municipal solid waste, building materials from residential demolition projects, furniture that cannot be reused. We used to work with Bridging or Goodwill, and we would take in furniture that could be used, but they have since gotten away from taking in items at cleanups. They find that some of the items that are just kind of dumped off there are not actually reusable, but so they end up getting stuck with a lot of what in the end is trash. So we just take the items that you really can't find another home for, and that'll be, again, going to our energy center. And then car and pickup truck tires and rims. So those are the items we take. And then this year, we had to make some changes because Ramsey County is opening the new environmental center at 1700 Kent Street, and they'll no longer be offering the satellite sites for household hazardous waste collection, so they won't be at Aldrich Arena this year any longer. We used to coordinate with them during the spring cleanup so that our residents could bring the household hazardous waste during that event, but they won't be there. So we are directing people to that new center, which opened on April 1st, and that's in Roseville. And it's conveniently located for most Maplewood residents, not too far out of the way. And it's we're going to schedule a tour, so we'll see what it's all about. But that did open up an opportunity to do a shredding-only express lane, and you'll see in the next map the layout. But so that's good news for people who like to do shredding at the event. Previously, you know, someone would have a little bag of recycling and try to get into the event, and it was just too challenging to have an express lane of sorts. And, you know, they'd be waiting in line with all these people with giant truckloads of junk, and, you know, it just wasn't worth their time. So now we're going to have this express lane. And then the prices will be the same as last year. It'll be on a per vehicle load, not an item based. So you can put as many old TVs and maybe a chair and a lamp into your car, and it'll cost you $25, and so on.
There's not an extra charge for mattresses and box springs? Because that price has gone up astronomically.
No,
to dump them.
No extra.
Crazy. That's great.
And it is good news. Ramsey County will be supplementing the cost of mattress and box spring collection. I believe it's 50% or more this year. Last year, they actually covered the cost of all. What's happening is the Recycling and Energy Center, they're really working with municipalities to collect those mattresses before they make their way to the Recycling and Energy Center, because they're just inundated with them. So if they can get to Second Chance Recycling and be recycled, you know, it saves a lot of processing time. But apparently they're running out of budget. So this year it'll be 50% covered by the county, so it's pretty cost effective for the city overall. And then here's that new layout map. You see Aldrich Arena in the center, and their parking lot extends on the south, east, and north side. And we used to enter into the area that says exit on the south side, and we had to do that because the household hazardous waste was up on that very northern portion. So now we're going to be entering on the north side, and it'll be interesting and maybe stressful for me to see how this works. but I'm hoping it's pretty smooth. People with all their bulky items will, go to the 2 lanes and enter the gate there and enter the cleanup, and then that express lane will be that 3rd lane, and they'll exit then onto Van Dyke, and if they also have additional items, they'll have to swing back around and then get back into the main line. So it's not ideal, but I think it'll be much more convenient, and we'll probably see more people shredding at the event. So we are looking for volunteers if you're interested. We have opportunities to distribute goodie bags at the entry gate. We work with Ramsey County to get some of their swag, their Ramsey Recycle swag. And usually we have some city council members that like to take that opportunity to do that, but they're not there the whole time, so there's some opportunity there. We take in food shelf items for Merrick Food Shelf and local food shelf, and we found that it's more people are more willing to give when they see a nice friendly face with a sign saying food shelf, and so having someone monitor that is helpful. And then because we have the shredding express lane, we'll need a few people there to help kind of direct traffic, and maybe once in a while just help take a bag of shredding material out of a trunk or something, nothing heavy there. And then internal, there's some opportunity for some traffic direction, because you can see a couple bottleneck spots there, but it's usually busiest between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., and all volunteers would get a lunch, so hey, think on it. And I'll send you an email to remind you and see if you're interested. The next item is the Arbor Day tree planting demonstration, which, May is such a busy time of year, May and April. You have Earth Week, you have Easter, you have fishing opener, Mother's Day. It was difficult to try to schedule around every other event. So unfortunately, this is on the same date as the spring cleanup. But the City Council did adopt a resolution, which is a requirement of our Tree City USA participation, to identify a day for Arbor Day. So the City Council chose May 3rd as Arbor Day, and in honor of that, our natural resource team will be doing a planting demonstration, and this will be at Edgerton Park. We did plant some trees out there last year or the year before as part of a grant to replace the dead ash trees. And some of those trees have been damaged, so we kind of want to replace them. So it's a good opportunity to kind of take care of both, to show people the proper way to plant trees, because of course we do have that tree sale where people have been purchasing trees. And again, that's pickup time here in May. At any rate, it's important to plant your trees correctly. So come on out to Edgerton Park, and the time is 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., and you can watch a demonstration and give them a hand. The next item is Waterfest. So this is our Environmental Commission's kind of main opportunity to do environmental education and outreach. And we were kind of waiting. The Commission had indicated they wanted to wait for the Friends of Maplewood Nature to be present. As you know, they were going to do a presentation, come before the Commission, so we could kind of talk about a coordination of our booths, because over the last few years, they've had a booth right next to the Environmental Commission, and then in the center, we would have a kids' activity that kind of coordinated around a certain theme. But unfortunately, because we had to process the St. Paul Police Training Facility, the Friends will have to come at a later date. But I did talk to them about, what their interests were, and they just really wanted to know what your interests were. And then the deadline came up where the Waterfest coordinators wanted to know if, number one, we want it to be a passport location again, which every year we have been. It's kind of a fun thing for the kids. They get a list of various booths, and they go around and get a stamp. But, it's an environmental education opportunity too, because, before you stamp it, you might talk about whatever your educating on and, or ask a question and then stamp it. So they wanted a catchy name for our booth for the passport. So I made an executive decision. And I thought, what did the Environmental Commission really want to focus on for your goals and your environmental priorities this year? And you had discussed trees, and you had also discussed working with businesses on improving their recycling and so forth. So I thought of two things. I thought of maybe a plastic reduction opportunity or trees. And we do have the AMPAC member, Jaylee, until the end of June. And we've been doing so much with trees that I chose trees. So the name of our booth for this passport, oh no, I forget. Jaylee came up with a creative name. Something about leaf. At any rate, we have chosen to focus on tree care, or trees in your backyard, and there's just so many things that we can talk about, tree diseases that are out there, proper pruning of trees. So with that said, looking for volunteers, number one, to help kind of coordinate the booth and that environmental education opportunity, and then number two, commissioners to actually attend the event. And we usually like to split it up into two shifts, starting maybe 10:30 just to help set up until 1:30, and then 1:30 to, 4 or 4:30 as you break down the materials. So I'm going to open it up for discussion there, and then, we can always follow up via email on maybe someone, you want to talk about a task force, or is that what you call it, a task force, or a subcommittee, there we go, to plan the booth. I see a lot of excited people that want to volunteer for that. I'm going to jot down your names right now.
Yeah. I'd be happy to volunteer, help coordinate the committee.
Thank you.
And then we would be working with the Friends of Maplewood, right, as well, to kind of coordinate this activity? Was that the plan? Seems how it's...
I will say that in the past, the Friends, what they like to do at their booth is really talk to people about what the Friends of Maplewood Nature does, and just kind of get the information out there, and possibility of getting additional volunteers and things like that. And then the kids' activity is really where we kind of have some synergy. But the Friends of Maplewood Nature do have a board meeting on May, I think it's 5th, and I can bring back whatever we discuss, or if you want, you could even attend this meeting. It's at the Nature Center at 6 p.m. I'll let you know. So we can coordinate further.
Sure. Yeah. But I would think, for picking a tree theme, I think it might be an easy synergy with that group as well. We could think about.
All right, and then as far as volunteering for the event, I'll send out details later. We don't have to discuss tonight, but thank you, Commissioner Cryer, for agreeing to assist with that, and we'll also coordinate with our AMPAC member, Jaylee. So look for additional information, and I'll also open it up to the other commissioners that weren't here tonight.
Perfect.
Thank you. And then I think finally, let's see here. Yes. Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to give you a rundown of the upcoming meetings. And again, these dates might change with our modified schedule. And also, they will change now that we know that the St. Paul Police Training Facility is coming back in May. But I was planning on bringing the Friends of Maplewood Nature here. They have been before the Environmental Commission before, but I think it's always a good opportunity for them to discuss what they're doing, and the Environmental Commission can discuss what they're doing and talk about, synergies in what we're doing. But we'll probably have to put that off to another month. And then we have to get our annual report to the City Council, so we'll review that. keep in mind that May 19th now will be the St. Paul Police Training Facility, the tabling of that. We still have to look at our green building code, get back to that. And then I've been working with the Capital Region Watershed District, and they're open to doing a tour at night or during the day. In June or August is what I had suggested. And they said if you want a more detailed tour on like the details of the building itself, you know, and how it's a green building, because that was one of our goals, was to kind of look at the building in addition to the site, that they would suggest more of a day tour so that one of their other staff members could be present. So, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think for me, a weekday tour would be potentially more difficult if it was during work hours. However, if we had like a calendar of options sent out with enough advance, it might be more feasible. I don't know. Everyone
Any
else's schedules
thoughts
are.
on the tour itself as, you know, you know what, I'll send out details. It sounded like she could do a kind of a high-level tour on overall, but if we wanted more specific details on how the building was built or something like that, she suggested daytime. But I'll send out additional details and we'll, and a survey on possible dates.
I feel like, and this might not be a popular from the retirement girl, that a tour in addition to our regular meeting, because we have so much to talk about and try and get accomplished, to take away one of the meeting days, especially in the summer. I know it would be adding an extra day, but people don't have to go on the tour. It's a voluntary thing, but I mean, the whole thing's voluntary. But but I'm just saying, if it's, I would say to do the tour in addition to a meeting, not in place of a meeting.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. And then, let's see what else. Oh, and I did work with Biz Recycling and Energy Smart. We had talked about one of the things the commission wanted to focus on was working with businesses to see how they're, if they need assistance with recycling or, you know, but Waste-Wise, who coordinates both of these programs, they also have this Energy Smart program where they work with businesses to do assessments of their energy use and offer technical advice on energy efficiency improvements and, you know, opportunities, possible grants or loans, things like that. So Waste-Wise will be here September 15th to give a presentation. And then events I wanted to go over briefly. May 3rd, of course, it's at Spring Cleanup. May 31st, we talked about Waterfest event. And then we have 3 Summer Celebrate events. The noticing that the September 19th is kind of the new 4th of July event. But so July 16th, we'll have the Summer Celebrate event at Afton Heights. And those are usually, I think, 6:30 to like 8 or something. They're just an hour and a half, and it's an opportunity to get a lot of different organizations and city staff and police and fire out there, and they have jumpy houses, and they usually have a petting zoo and, you know, different tabling events, so it's a good opportunity for the Environmental Commission to do some education at these events. So the first one is July 16th at Afton Heights, which is more towards South Maplewood. And the second one is August 13th at Edgerton Park, of course, on the west side of Maplewood. And then finally, the city has decided to reschedule the 4th of July event to Friday Night Fireworks, which is what they'll be called now, and it will be coordination with the Touch a Truck event. And so that's September 19th. They found that, well, there's less of a chance for thunderstorms on September 19th, which is why the 4th of July has had to be canceled a couple years now. And also, you know, you can do the fireworks a little earlier, so kids get home earlier, and it's on a Friday night always, and of course 4th of July runs on a various number of days. So that's been decided. So those are some opportunities, and I'll send those dates for you so you can get them on your calendar, and we can talk further if we want to do any kind of tabling there. So with that, I am complete with my staff presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. A lot of exciting events, things coming up in the next few months and this year. Appreciate it. I think with that, brings us to the end of the meeting. I'll move to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Cryer. All those in favor?
Hi.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned at 8:32 PM.